Hazel Lyndon stood at the front of the little timber church in Bonham, in her dead mother's made-over wedding dress, for 40 long minutes past the hour, with the whole border town packed into the pews and watching. And the old preacher shifting his feet and clearing his throat and finding nothing in his book to cover a thing like this. She stood there in the white that had been let out at the seams and taken in at the waist and pressed 3 times the night before, and she watched the door at the back of the church the way a person watches a fire they cannot stop. And she waited. And then a boy came up the aisle. Not the groom. A boy. Some neighbor's barefoot son with a folded paper in his fist and his eyes on the floor. And he put the note into Hazel Lyndon's hands in front of the whole of Bonham, and she opened it, and she read in 5 short lines, standing at the altar in her wedding dress, that she would not be married that day, nor any day after, because Dorsey Lott had thought better of it. He did not come himself. That was the part the town would chew on longest, for years, around their stoves of a winter night. He did not even ride out to her father's grave and say it to the only kin she had that was still in town, which was a dead man. He sent a boy with a note. Dorsey Lott had found himself a better offer. The banker's daughter over in Coldwater, plump with a dowry, and rather than stand up in front of Hazel and say the words a man ought to have the spine to say to a woman's face, he had let her dress, and let her stand, and let her wait at the altar before all the world, and then jilted her by messenger like you'd send back a parcel that didn't fit, so that Hazel Lyndon's humiliation was as public and as whole and as bottomless as a humiliation can be made. She stood there with the note in her hand and the church gone dead silent and every eye in Bonham fixed on her face to see what she would do with it. And she did the one thing left to her that had any dignity in it at all, which was to fold that note up small, and small again, until it was a hard little square in her fist, and lift her chin, and turn, and walk back down the aisle alone. Past the whispering. Past the pity, which was almost worse than the laughing. Past Mrs. Gantry's slow shaking head and old Coyle's badly hidden grin, out through the church doors into the white border country light, and she kept walking. She walked through the town and out the far end of it, where the road gave up being a street and became just a road, and the houses thinned and the fence posts leaned. And there, at the edge of everything, where Bonham stopped being Bonham and the open borderland began, she ran clean out of places to walk to. For that was the cruelty under the cruelty. Hazel Lyndon had nothing to fall back on. Her father, Asa Lyndon, had been a beekeeper, a soft-spoken gentleman of a man who had kept his hives and sold his honey up and down the border, and even, in the years when the trade roads were quiet enough, across the line into the Ork country, where they prized his amber-dark honey above gold and traded furs and worked iron for it. He had taught his daughter everything he knew of the small humming kingdom, every secret of the comb, from the time she was a girl small enough to ride his shoulders out to the skeps. And when he died the winter before, of a cough that took him in 3 weeks, his debts came due all at once, and they took the bees, and they took the cottage both, and left Hazel an orphan of 24, with no home, no people, no living, and no ground under her feet but the one solid thing she had managed to lay hold of, Dorsey Lott's proposal of marriage. She had pinned everything to it. A husband, a roof, a place in the town, a future with a shape to it. She had pinned her whole self to that one promise because it was every single thing she had. And now Dorsey had reached out and pulled it loose in front of the entire town, and she had no father, no home, no bees, no name worth anything, and a public ruin laid over the top of all of it like frost. Because a jilted woman, by the strange and rotten arithmetic of small towns, is somehow made to carry the shame of the man who jilted her, as if she had done something to deserve the leaving. Every respectable door in Bonham swung quietly shut against her in the space of a single morning. So she sat down on a flat gray stone by the road in her wedding dress with the hard little square of the note still in her fist. Because there was nowhere left to go and she could no longer make her legs carry her in any direction that meant anything. She had not let herself cry in the church, in front of all of them, and she was not going to start now on an open road where a passing wagon might see. So she just sat there, dry-eyed and scraped hollow, in the white dress going gray at the hem with road dust, and she waited, without the smallest idea in the world what she was waiting for. It was the King of Ashvale who found her. His name was Rogar, and he stood near to 7 feet when he was not stooping, which was most of the time, and he was an orc, gray-green of skin, broad as a door, with 2 short tusks at the corners of his mouth and a long pale scar that ran from his left brow down into his jaw, and hands that could have closed around Hazel's whole head like an apple. He was 30, and some by the reckoning of men, a king of the border clans by blood and by the harder right of having held them together through 2 bad winters and 1 worse war, and he had been at the wedding. Not in it, orcs were tolerated in Bonham on market days for the trade and not much more, but at the very back, in the deep shadow under the gallery where the town liked to pretend he wasn't. Come in to settle accounts with a grain factor and stayed, when he saw the white dress, out of a thing he could not have named. He had known Hazel Lyndon. He had bought the old man's honey for 9 years and sat at his table twice and thought him the only human in that country who had ever looked at an orc and seen a man. And he had watched the beekeeper's daughter at her father's hives when she was small, watched her move among them with that uncanny stillness, and thought, even then, there is a soul that the bees have agreed to love, and that is no small thing to be. So Rogar of Ashvale had stood in the shadow at the back of a human church and watched a coward break that woman in half in front of her whole town with a folded piece of paper. And he had felt a slow, banked, dangerous heat come up in him, the kind of anger an orc learns young to sit on, because an angry orc in a human town is a dead orc by sundown. He had watched her fold the note and lift her chin and walk out with more dignity than every soul in that building put together, and he had let her go and given her a decent while, and then found he could not for the life of him simply mount his horse and ride home north over the line as if he had seen nothing. A man who has watched a thing like that does not just go home. So he had come looking, and he found her on the gray stone at the edge of the world in her wedding dress, with the look on her face of a person standing at the very last foot of the very last road they have. He did not make a speech. Orcs, in the main, distrust speeches. They have heard too many human ones come before too much human treachery. He stopped a good 10 feet off, which, for a creature his size, was the difference between looming and not, and he took off his battered traveling hat, which is not an orc custom but was Hazel Lyndon's, learned at the old man's table. And he held it in both of those enormous hands, and he asked her the only question in the whole wide world that mattered. Miss Lyndon. His voice came out of him like rocks turning over deep in a river, but slow and careful, and pitched down as soft as a thing that big could pitch it. It is no business of mine, and I will go if you tell me to go, and there will be no offense in it. But the evening is coming on, and I find I cannot ride off north and leave you sitting on a stone by the road in your wedding dress without first asking you one thing. He turned the hat in his hands. Do you have anywhere to go? Hazel Lyndon looked up. She looked up a long way, at the great scarred gray-green king of the orcs standing hat in hand on the human road at dusk, and some far back part of her that ought to have been afraid was simply too emptied out to manage it. And she found that she could not even reach for a polite lie, being miles and miles past the country where polite lies grow. No, she said. I haven't. Her voice was flat and even, and it frightened her a little how steady it was. My father's dead, and the bees are sold off, and the cottage is gone to his debts, and there's no home anywhere to go back to. And no respectable house in that town will so much as let me wash their steps now, after what they all just watched. I have nowhere to go. Your Mr. Rogar. I don't even rightly know what I'm meant to call a king. I've been sitting on this rock since the church trying to work out what a person does when they have run all the way out of places to be. And I haven't got it worked out yet. She looked back down at the note in her fist. I don't think there's an answer to it. I think you just sit on the rock. And Rogar of Ashvale looked at her. A long, level, considering moment. The way he looked at hard ground before he decided what could be grown in it. And then he said the 4 words that turned Hazel Lyndon's entire life over on its hinge. Now you do, he said. She stared at him. He went on, plain and quick, the way a careful man hurries to get a true thing said before pride can rise up on the other side and knock it down. I have an orchard. My father planted it, the year I was born, every tree set in the ground by his own hand, apple and a little peach and pear, up in the green valley under my keep, in the heart of Ashvale. It was the one soft thing that hard old man ever made, and he meant it for sons and grandsons, and a long line of us eating fruit in the shade, and most of that line he never got. And for 6 years now that orchard has not borne. Not a true crop. The blossom comes, and the blossom falls, and nothing sets. And the few apples that come are small, and bitter, and drop green. And not a soul among my people, nor any human grafter I have paid good iron to come look, has ever been able to tell me one reason why. We call it the Heart Grove. My people think the land has turned its face from us. I have half come to think so myself. He took a step nearer, just one, and crouched down on his heels so that, for the first time, his eyes were no higher than hers. I knew your father. I bought his honey 9 years and counted him a friend, which is a word an orc does not spend cheap on a man. And I watched you among his hives when you were a child, and there was a gift in your hands then that I have not seen the equal of in all the years since. I have been meaning to put bees back into that valley for half my life, and I never once knew how to begin, and every keeper I asked for was a human, and every human I asked would sooner kiss a snake than cross the line into orc country to work for an orc. His scarred mouth did something that was almost, not quite, a grim kind of smile. So understand me, Miss Lyndon. This is not charity. I will thank you not to take it as such, because I have not got the patience to argue a proud woman out of an insult I did not offer. This is a fair offer of work, from a man who needs a thing done that only you in all this border country can do. Come north and keep bees on my land. Find me hives, build them up, set them in the heart grove, and bring the thing back to life. There is a room with a door and a lock that is yours, and a fair wage in good silver, and bees of your own again, and honest work that no one on this earth can do better than you. You asked the road what a person does when they have run out of places to be, and the road sent you me. So, now you do. There is a valley north of here that needs you a great deal more than this town has ever once deserved to keep you. He rose back up to his full great height and put the battered hat back on his head. I will not press you, he said. I know full well what you have had pressed on you already today, and I have no wish to add my own weight to it. The offer is real, and it stands, whether you give me your answer here in this road tonight or take a week to weigh it. But I will say one thing more, and then I will be quiet. He looked north, toward the line, toward home. I have buried a war, 2 winters, and a father, and I have learned that the worst day a person ever stands through is most often the same day the door to the rest of their life comes open. Only it opens so quiet, and so plain, and so unlike the loud good thing they were expecting, that they near walk past it sitting on a rock. Do not walk past it, Miss Lyndon. Come keep the bees. And Hazel Lyndon, who had risen that morning to be married to one man and been thrown away in front of her whole town by supper time, got up off the gray stone at the edge of the world that evening, and went north over the line to keep bees for an orc king, because the only other thing on offer was the dark and the ditch and the long cold walk back into a town that had already decided what she was. And because something in the plain, level, unhurried way that enormous scarred creature had said now, had reached all the way down into the part of her that had quietly lain down to die on that rock, and taken it by the collar, and told it, without heat and without pity, to get up. Before we go any further, let me ask you one thing. This channel is brand new, and every single subscribe is what keeps stories like this one coming. It's free, it takes you 1 second, and it means more than you'll ever know. So hit that subscribe button, tell us down in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight, and let's get back to Hazel. Because believe me, the king who found her on that rock is not done surprising her yet. The crossing of the line came at full dark, and it cost Hazel more than she let her face show. For a human raised in Bonham learns orc country the way they learn the edge of a cliff, as a place you do not go. The stories come with the milk. Orcs ate the cattle. Orcs ate worse than cattle, if the church step gossip ran true. Hazel had heard, her whole life, that the ground beyond the line was a burned and toothy place where a human woman would not last a night. And now she rode into it in the dark in a wedding dress, on a borrowed pillion behind the very king of the things, with her father's old honey knife in her boot, and her heart going like a struck drum, and every story she had ever swallowed came up to meet her at the edge of the lamplight. She had jumped, she understood, from the frying pan straight off the edge of the known world, and there was no road back over the line tonight that she would survive walking alone. But the burned toothy place was not there. There was, instead, a long climbing road under big quiet stars, and pine, and the smell of wood smoke, and something baking, and low stone houses with warm windows, and orc children, which she had never once in her life thought of as a thing that existed, gray-green and round-cheeked and fast asleep behind glass, and at the head of the valley a great old keep of dark stone with a fire in every window and a banner over the gate she could not read. And it came to Hazel Lyndon, somewhere on that dark climbing road, holding the back of a saddle to keep from falling against the broad, warm back of a creature her whole town would have shot on sight, that she had been more truly afraid standing safe in a Bonham church that morning, among her own kind in the white dress, waiting on a man who was even then writing her off with a borrowed pen, than she was now, riding into the dark of everything she had been taught to dread. The thought did not comfort her, exactly, but it lit one small, steady candle in her, and by its light she found she was not, after all, going to cry tonight either. They gave her the room he'd promised. It was high in a corner of the old keep, with a deep window that looked down the whole moonlit length of the Dead Valley orchard, and a bed with furs on it, and a fire already laid and lit by some unseen hand. And she checked it 3 times, like a child. A stout door with a heavy iron bolt on the inside. Her side. Hers to throw. A king's whole stone house full of orcs below her in the dark, and the one bolt that mattered was on her side of the door. And on the broad sill of that deep window, where someone had set it for her without a word, stood a single small clay crock of honey. Dark as a garnet, held to firelight. She did not have to break the wax to know whose hands had drawn it years ago, or off whose hives. She pried the seal with her thumbnail and tasted it, there in the firelight in her ruined wedding dress, and it was her father's. His amber dark border honey, the last of it, hoarded all these years up here across the line by a king who had counted a beekeeper a friend. And that, of everything that endless day had done to her, the altar, the note, the boy, the long staring walk, the rock at the edge of the world. That was the thing that finally, quietly, in a room with a bolt on her own side of the door, made Hazel Lyndon put her face in her hands and weep. Not from grief. From the strange, unbearable mercy of being. After the worst day of her life, somewhere that she was wanted, she slept, in the end, hard and dark and dreamless, and woke to an orc valley full of birdsong and the smell of bread, a jilted bride no longer, but a beekeeper with a wage, a locked door, and a dead grove waiting downhill for the one gift in the world she had to give it. There is one more thing you ought to know before we go on, because the whole rest of this tale turns on it. Rogar of Ashvale kept a book. It was a great, heavy thing bound in black hide, and it had not started life as anything tender. It had started life as a war ledger, the grim accounting book the border kings kept of every wrong done to the clans. Every raid and every burned field and every name owed blood, so that no insult should ever be forgotten and no debt ever go unpaid. Rogar's father had kept it. Rogar had kept it through the war, in a hand like a row of axe strokes, page after page of grievance and the grim arithmetic of revenge. It was the single most important object in the keep, and his people knew the weight of it, and feared it a little. And on the night he carried a weeping human woman's honeycrock up to a high room and bolted her safe inside, Rogar of Ashvale sat down by his own fire, and opened the great black book of grudges, and found the next blank page, and he did a thing that would have curdled his father's ghost. He took up his pen, and in that axe-stroke hand, under the long, terrible column of human wrongs, he wrote a new entry that had nothing in it of blood or debt or revenge at all. She came north, he wrote. She did not have to. I told her it was about the bees, and she let me say it, which was a kindness, because we both knew it was a lie before I finished saying it. The grove has waited 6 years. I find I can wait a little longer than that, if I have to. He looked at the words a while. Then he wrote one line more, and shut the book. Entry 1. And that, friends, is the book the whole valley will come to wonder about. The war ledger of an orc king, slowly filling up, page after page, year over year, not with the debts of his enemies, but with the small daily account of one human woman and a grove coming back to life. Keep it in mind. We will be opening it again. Hazel Lyndon did not heal fast. A wound dealt in front of a whole town does not close in a week, and there were mornings that first while when she woke in the high room before she remembered where she was, and reached, half asleep, for a future that wasn't there anymore, and had to find it gone all over again. But the bees healed her faster than anything human ever could have, because Rogar of Ashvale had not exaggerated her gift by so much as a hair. Hazel Lyndon among bees was a different creature than Hazel Lyndon among people. Among people she had always been a touch braced, a touch flinching, a girl who had learned to read a room for where the next unkindness was coming from. Among bees she was sure, and slow, and unhurried, and entirely unafraid, her bare hands moving through the comb while the bees walked over her wrists and the backs of her fingers and into the cup of her palm and never once stung her, the whole golden roar of them gentling around her like water finding its level. It was a thing her father had seen in her when she was 6 years old, and named and treasured. And it was a thing the whole human world had found, in all the years since, not one single use for. Until now. She got her start with 2 failing skeps off a goblin trader, who passed through Ashvale with them strapped to a mule and no notion of what to do with a thing that stung, having taken them in trade and regretted it ever since. Hazel looked them over and bought them both for less than the trader had feared and more than he'd hoped, and carried them up the valley like a midwife carrying twins, and she nursed those 2 near-dead colonies back from the very edge through that first long summer. She fed them. She re-queened the worse of the two. She split them when they were strong enough to split, and split them again, and begged and bought and trapped every wild swarm in 3 valleys, until by the back of the summer she had a dozen good young hives roaring with life, and one bright cold morning she carried them down, one by one, into the dead heart of the heart grove, and set them in among the barren old trees that had not borne a true crop in 6 long years. And the next spring, the orchard that the orcs had given up on as cursed land foamed up into blossom and roared. From the first gray of dawn to the last of the dark it hummed, every tree from root to crown alive with Hazel's bees, every blossom worked and worked and worked again, as that grove had not been worked since the old wild bees thinned out of the valley a decade gone and nobody marked their leaving. The whole green bowl of the place rang like a struck bell from sunup to sundown, all through the bloom. And that autumn, the heart grove of Ashvale, the dead grove, the cursed grove, the grove the king kept out of grief and not sense, bore so heavy that they had to cut props from the pine wood and prop the groaning limbs to keep them from splitting off the trunks under the sheer red weight of fruit. The first true crop in 6 years. The first since before the war, and the whole towering reason for it was a small humming kingdom of insects that a jilted human girl had set, hive by patient hive, beneath the trees. The grove had never once been sick. The land had never turned its face away. The orcs had read a curse into a thing that had no curse in it at all. The heart grove had only been lonely, barren for the simple want of bees, for the lack of that one small, daily, faithful attention without which no orchard on earth will ever set its fruit, no matter how good the soil or how true the prayers. And Hazel Lyndon, who knew down to the marrow of her bones exactly what it was to go barren and bitter and small for the lack of the one right daily tending, who had stood at an altar gone hollow for the want of being chosen, gave the grove the one thing it had been starving for, and stood under the propped and dripping trees that first heavy autumn, and looked up into all that returning life, and understood, with a catch in her throat, that she was looking at something about her own self. The orcs took to her by inches, and the inches make a story worth the telling. They did not, in the main, know what to do with her. A king's word is a king's word, and so the human woman was safe in Ashvale from the first hour. But safe is a long way from welcome, and for a good while the warriors of the valley gave Hazel and her hives a wide and dignified berth and watched her sidelong, the way you'd watch a small, unpredictable weather. The funniest part of it, which Hazel did not let them see her find funny, was the bees. For here were orcs. Here were the great gray-green terrors of the border, who in living memory had broken the gates of 2 human cities and sent grown soldiers home gray-haired, and to a one of them, very nearly, they were frightened half out of their wits by a box full of insects the size of barleycorns. Hazel watched the valley's champion, a slab of an orc named Gutmoke, who wore the teeth of things she did not want to ask about on a thong at his throat, edge a full 30 feet out of his way to avoid a hive, with the elaborate carelessness of a very large person pretending very hard he is not afraid. You could kill any one of them between 2 fingers, Hazel said to him, mild, the first morning she dared. "Aye," said Gutmoke, with enormous and wounded dignity, eyeing the hive, "and it could put its poison in me first. There is no honor to be had against a thing that small and that committed. I will fight what fights fair." And the valley's champion would not, for love nor the king's command, come within an arm of a hive ever after, and Hazel came in time to love him for it. Old Varga was the first to truly cross to her, and Varga was the keep's healer, a stooped old orc woman with a face like a walnut and not one human flattering bone in her whole body. She came down to the hives the second summer with her baskets, gruff and unannounced, and watched Hazel work in silence a while, and then said, "You bleed for a burn, human?" "For a burn? No. For a burn I'd want the comb itself, and a clean cloth, and honey straight on it under the dressing. It keeps the rot off better than anything I know." Hazel said it without looking up from her frame. The old orc woman was quiet a moment. "We pack a burn with river clay and a prayer," she said, "and lose 1 in 5. "Try the honey," said Hazel. "You'll lose fewer." Varga tried the honey. She lost fewer. And after that the old healer came down to the hives every few days for her honey and her hard, useful, unpretty conversation. And where the keep's healer goes, the keep's women follow. And where the women go, the children come, and the children, of course, were never afraid of the bees for 1 single second. The way only the very small and the very wise are never afraid of the right things. The valley's children took to Hazel like she was a season, and went home to tell their terrified champion fathers exactly how brave the bees had found them to be, which is a thing I would have paid silver to watch. So it was that Hazel Lyndon, who had been thrown out by her own kind in front of her own town, judged and pitied and quietly shown the door by every respectable human in Bonham, found a place, a true place, a wanted and a needed and a useful place, among the very people her whole life had taught her to fear. The monsters across the line took her in and set her to work and were glad of her. Her own people had not. There was a lesson in that arithmetic that Hazel turned over many a long evening and never did get all the way to the bottom of. "Entry 16, wrote Rogar one night, in the Black Book. Gutmoke carried the props for her down to the grove today and pretended it was on his way. It was not on his way. Nothing is on his way to the grove. The whole valley is finding sudden reasons to walk past the bees. I include myself in this, and I am the king, and may walk where I please." She changed, that first year and the next, the way the grove changed. The flinching, braced, watchful dignity she had carried out of the church door eased, frame by frame, and heavy harvest by heavy harvest, into something steadier and warmer and rooted. The girl who had pinned her entire worth to one man's willingness to put a ring on her learned slowly, with her hands full of work that only she on this earth could do, that her worth had never once been Dorsey Lott's to give or to deny, that it had never been in any man's keeping at all, but in her own 2 hands the whole long while, in the gift her dead father had laid there when she was 6, waiting only for someone to need it badly enough to ask. Rogar needed it, and this was the whole of the thing. He said so, plainly, and often, and out loud. He asked her judgment on the trees as though it weighed a great deal more than his own, which in the one matter of the grove it flatly did, and when she said prop that limb, the limb got propped, and when she said that tree is hollow and will come down in the first hard wind, take it now and plant 2. The tree came down, and 2 went in. A woman who has been thrown away in public does not soon come round to believing she was ever worth the keeping. But it is a powerful, hard thing to go on disbelieving it with both your hands full of work the world plainly cannot do without you, and a great quiet king across the grove treating your every opinion like the weather he'd best heed. Belief crept back into Hazel Lyndon, not through any soft word, but through the hard daily proof of being needed, which is the only road belief ever truly travels. The honey came too. Dark, resinous, garnet-red orchard honey. Her father's honey reborn in a new valley. And it sold faster off the Ashvale stalls than she could draw and crock it. The king's holdings did better those 2 years than in a hard decade, and Rogar was too honest an orc to pretend he didn't know precisely whose 2 hands had turned it. He told her about the grove one evening when the telling had come to matter more than the money. His father had set every tree of it by hand the year Rogar was born, and meant it. This hard old war king, who had buried more sons than he could rightly carry, meant it for a long, green, peaceable line of family, eating fruit in its shade, down all the years to come. And most of that line had died, in the wars and the winters, before they could so much as climb a single tree. And when the grove went barren, It had near broken the old king, who read it, the way grieving men do, as the land itself agreeing with his grief, confirming that the peaceable green future he'd planted for was never coming. He died believing it. And Rogar had kept the dead grove standing ever since out of love and not 1 ounce of sense. A green monument to a hard dead father's one soft hope, that he could not bring to bear and could not bring himself to fell. Hazel told him, in her turn, about Hazel Lyndon and the gentle humming years of her girlhood out among the skeps, and the cough that took him in 3 weeks, and the debts that came in like a tide after and took the bees and the cottage and left her with nothing in the world but a gift and no ground to use it on. And there, across a low fire in an orc keep, the two of them found out a strange and quiet thing about each other, that they were each the last living keeper of a dead father's dream gone fallow. His father's grove, her father's bees. 2 ruined inheritances, 2 green hopes left to die for the want of the one thing that could finish them. And that, set together at the long last in one northern valley, the orchard and the bees, the 2 fallow dreams had risen up between them and made one single living thing that now fed and warmed and kept the both of them. Neither one of them said aloud what that seemed so very plainly to mean. But after that evening, Rogar took to leaving a small crock of the year's first honey on the sill of Hazel's window of a morning, without a word, the way he had the first night. And Hazel took to setting by, off the heavy-propped trees, the single best and reddest apple of each day's picking, and leaving it where the king would find it. And the grove hummed, and the valley healed, and the 2 of them healed along with it by slow inches, and a black book by a fire filled up another page, and then another. Entry 31, it read. She left the best apple again. I have begun to choose the day around finding it. This is not a kingly way to spend a mind, and I do not intend to stop. Now I told you the grove was a monument, and I told you it bore again, but I did not yet tell you the whole of what hung on it. And you need to know, because the stakes here ran a great deal deeper than one king's private grief. Ashvale was failing, quietly, slowly, the way a people fails, not in one battle, but in a long, thin grinding of bad years. 2 hard winters and a war had thinned the clans, and the young ones had begun to drift down out of the lean valley to take service with richer southern kings, because a people will not stay to starve on the strength of a banner alone. And the dead Heart Grove, in the hearts of the orcs of Ashvale, had become the very sign of all of it. Proof, written in barren branches overhead, that the land itself had given up on them. That there was no green future here worth a young orc's staying for. The Heart Grove will not bear, they said low, of a winter. So why should we? It had become the place where Ashvale's hope went to be confirmed dead. So when Hazel's bees brought the grove roaring back, when the whole valley walked down in a body that first autumn and stood under limbs propped and groaning with the first red fruit in 6 years, the first since before the war, more apples than the whole keep could eat. It was not one man's orchard she had saved. She had reached up into the single deepest fear of a whole failing people and pulled it down and put a living, fruiting, undeniable thing in its place. The young ones stopped drifting south. The Heart Grove bears again, they said now, and a thing came back into the valley with the fruit that had been leaking out of it for years. And the word for that thing is hope. and a human woman had carried it back over the line in 2 failing skeps on a goblin's mule. Hazel understood what she had done the day she heard a pack of orc children, too young to remember the barren years, playing a game beneath the loaded trees in which the grove had always borne and always would, world without end. And she stood at the edge of the grove with a frame of comb gone forgotten in her hands, and understood that she had not mended an orchard, she had mended a future. She, who had stood at an altar with no future of her own left in all the world, had walked north and handed a whole people back theirs. That was the night Rogar found her at the grove's edge in the dark, not working, just standing, and did not ask her what was wrong, having learned by then that she would say it or she would not. And after a while, she said it. "I didn't know," she said, "what the grove was. To them. I thought it was your father's trees. I didn't know I was—" And she stopped. "I know," he said. "I did not tell you on purpose. You would have frozen up under the weight of it and gotten nothing done. Some things you can only do if no one has told you yet that they are impossible." He was quiet a moment. "You gave my people back there tomorrow, Hazel Lyndon. I do not have the word in my tongue, or in yours, to thank you for it, so I have stopped looking for the word and started leaving the honey instead. I expect you have noticed." "I've noticed," said Hazel to the dark, and did not trust her voice with one syllable more. "If this story has its hooks in you by now, do me one small favor. Take a second, hit subscribe, leave a like, and tell us down in the comments how many entries you think Rogar has scratched into that old war ledger by now, because I promise you, he is not slowing down. There's a whole world of these waiting for you over on the channel, Orc Girl and Human. Now let's see what the human side of the line has to say about all this. Because they were not, it turns out, quite finished with Hazel yet. Word travels, even over a guarded line, and the word that traveled south was this, that the jilted Lyndon girl had not died in a ditch the way decency required, but had turned up across the line in Orc country, living right out at the Orc King's own keep, raising his famous orchard, and was, of all the galling and improper things a ruined woman could do, getting on. Bonham, which had buried her in its mind the day she walked out and did not care to be corrected, found this intolerable and dispatched its conscience to set her straight. In the considerable shape of Mrs. Gantry came to the border market, she would no more have crossed the line into the valley than she'd have walked into a lion's mouth, and so she stood her ground at the very last human stall and sent word in that the Lyndon girl was to come out and be spoken to. And Hazel, who could have ignored it, came out, because she had decided some while back that she was done being a thing that other people talked about behind their hands instead of to her face. She came to the market stall with a crock of dark honey still in her hands. Mrs. Gantry took her in, head to foot, the strong brown work roughened hands, the easy carriage, the gray-green orc children peering round Hazel's skirts at the strange, pale, frightening human lady. And Mrs. Gantry's nostrils went thin. "Living out there," she said. "Alone, at his keep. Among them. With the whole border talking of it. And you ruined once already, Hazel Lyndon. Have you no thought at all for how it looks? A human woman, kept by an orc? Have you no shame left to lose?" Hazel did not hurry. She set the crock of honey down on the boards, gentle, and she straightened, and she looked Mrs. Gantry full in her righteous face. "Mrs. Gantry," she said, clear and level and carrying, so that the whole listening market heard every word. "I stood up in a church in front of every soul in Bonham in my wedding dress, and I was thrown over by a coward who hadn't the spine to come and do it to my face, and he sent a boy with a note. And the whole of that town has spent these 2 years clucking over how that looked, as though I were the one who'd done the jilting. So you'll forgive me if I've learned exactly what the towns care for how a thing looks is worth, which is precisely nothing at all, and I've none of my own left over to spend on it. You ask, have I no shame? I had a wagon load of it, ma'am, once. Bonham gave it to me free, in that church. I left it on the floor by the altar with the rest of what didn't fit me any more, and I have not missed it for one single day. She picked the crock of honey back up. That man you can't bring yourself to name found me on a rock at the edge of the world with nowhere on this earth to go, and he took off his hat, and he asked me did I have anywhere, and meant it, and when I said no he gave me work, and a door with a bolt on the inside of it, and my bees back, and a wage, and 2 whole years in which to remember that I was worth more than one coward's borrowed pen. And he has never once, not in 2 years, pressed me for a single thing. So you may tell Bonham, with my compliments, that I know exactly how it looks, and exactly what it cost, and that I would not trade 1 hour of it for that whole town's good opinion polished up and handed back to me on a plate. She held out the crock. Take some honey for the road, Mrs. Gantry. Mind the bee on your collar there. No, don't swat it. It'll only take that personal. They can tell, I've come to think, who's come round meaning kindness, and who's come round meaning otherwise. And they do hold opinions. Mrs. Gantry left rather quickly, with a bee walking a slow and thoughtful circuit of her good Sunday collar the whole way to her wagon, and did not come north again. The market had a great deal to say after, and the orcs who'd heard it told it round the keep fires for a month, with improvements. But the human side of the line was not done. For where a Mrs. Gantry goes with her gossip, harder men sometimes follow with worse, and there were those in Bonham and Coldwater both. Proud men, lords' men, men who did not like to be reminded that an orc had taken in what humans threw out and made it thrive, who began to put it about that the Lyndon girl had not gone north willing at all, that she'd been taken, carried off over the line the way the old stories said orcs did, and was being held against her will in the Orc King's keep, and that decent human men ought to ride up and get her back, for the honor of the line, whether she wished it or no. It came to a head on a gray autumn day when a dozen riders came up to the line under a Coldwater banner, armed and grim and full of their own righteousness, and demanded at the boundary stone that the King of Ashvale give up the human woman he'd stolen, or answer for it. And here is the thing you must understand about Rogar, the thing that is the whole spine of this tale. He did not gather his warriors. He did not so much as raise his voice. He sent for Hazel, and he walked down to the line with her at his side and no one else, and he stood there before the dozen armed and bristling human riders, this great scarred king who could have closed the line in blood inside an hour, and he said only this: "You say I am holding a woman against her will. There is the woman, there is the road south, open, behind me, and no orc between her and it. Ask her." And he stepped back. He stepped clean back, and left Hazel Lyndon standing alone in the gap between the armed men of her own people and the king of the orcs, with the road home open at her back and no hand laid on her, free as the wind, and the whole of her future hers alone to say. The Coldwater captain looked at her. "You've only to come, mistress," he said, "gentler now, uncertain. Walk south. We'll see you safe to human land. You needn't fear him, we're a dozen blades. Just walk, and be free of it." Hazel Lyndon looked at the open road south. She looked at the dozen armed men of her own kind, come at last, 2 years too late, to rescue her. These decent men of the very towns that had shut every door against her and clucked at how she looked and named her ruined and let her walk out to die. And she looked back, up the green valley, at the loaded grove and the low warm houses and the children and the great quiet king who had just stepped back and handed her the whole of her own freedom in front of armed men without so much as a question on his face. who would, she knew to the bottom of her soul, have let her walk south down that road that very minute, and never said one word to stop her, though it would have closed the grove and broken something in him there was no honeycrock big enough to mend. "I thank you for the offer of rescue," said Hazel Lyndon to the captain, clear and even. "It is 2 years late, and from the wrong direction, but I thank you for it." She turned her back on the open road south. "I am not held here, Captain. I have never once been held here. I was welcomed here, which is a thing my own people never managed, and I stay here because I choose it, with my eyes open and my own 2 feet. And you may carry that south and tell whoever it was that sent you fearing for my honor that my honor has never in its life been safer than it is exactly where I'm standing. Now take your blades home. You're frightening my bees." And she walked back up the valley, north of her own free will, in front of all of them, and did not look back, and the riders sat their horses a while in the gray light, and then turned and went home with nothing, and the line was quiet again. That night Rogar rode in the Black Book a long while, and what he wrote was this. Entry 40. They opened the road home, and she did not take it. I had told myself for 2 years that I kept her by need, and not by any want, that the grove held her, and not I. She turned her back on her own road today in front of armed men, and I have run clean out of ways to go on lying to myself about it. I do not know what to do with this. I am a king, and I have ordered men to their deaths, and I do not know how to ask one human woman a question whose answer I am not certain I could survive. He looked at it a long, long while by the low fire. Then, beneath it, he wrote 1 line more, and shut the book. Not yet. She faced down her whole world today. Let her have an evening before her king turns coward and asks her something he should not. The turn of it came at a harvest, under the propped and groaning trees, in the long gold light of an Ashvale evening. Rogar had taken, that 3rd autumn, to working the grove alongside her of an evening when the day's kingship was done, and there is a particular thing that happens between 2 people who labor side by side at quiet work for season after season, a thing that builds without words and cannot be hurried and will not be summoned, and it had been building between these 2 for the better part of 3 years now. Jar of honey by best red apple, until the air under those trees was so full of the unsaid that you could near have spread it on bread. And on this evening the 2 of them stood together under the loaded apple boughs with the bees going home gold in the last of the light, and Rogar of Ashvale, who was a poor and plain and clumsy hand at this, and knew it, made his slow halting way toward the thing he had been failing to say for 3 years. 6 years, he said, turning an apple in his great gray hand, looking at it and not at her. I looked at these trees and called them dying. And every grafter and forester I paid told me the same, that the land had soured, that there was no fixing it, that the thing was just over and I should fell it and grieve it and move on. And not one of them was right, because not one of them ever once thought to ask what the grove had lost. It was not dying, Hazel. It had only lost the one thing it could not do without, and gone barren waiting on it, year over year, and learned to call the waiting normal. I have thought on that a great deal lately, more than is good for a king. He picked another apple. He was, she saw, near out of apples on this branch, and stalling. I was content enough alone, he said lower, the way this grove was content enough barren, which is to say not content at all, only used to it, only gone so long without that it had forgotten there was a without. I had a keep and a crown and a war won and a people to keep fed, and I told myself a king does not need the soft green line his father planted for, that such things were for other, luckier men. And then you came north on a goblin's mule with 2 half-dead skeps, and you set something humming under the whole of my life, and now, and here the great scarred king of the orcs ran clean out of road, and stood there, with his ears gone a darker green at the tips, holding an apple in both hands like a boy. Now I find I cannot go back to how it was before you. No more than these trees could go back to barren now that they've remembered how to bear. I am saying it poorly. I knew I would. I have rehearsed it 40 ways by that fire, and they all come out poorly. But you did not only fix my grove, Hazel Lyndon. You. And there he stopped. Hazel Lyndon stood under the heavy boughs with the last bees humming home around the two of them, and she did not say one word either. Because, the truth was, she had no more words ready than he did, and the words there were felt too large and too easy to break to risk on the open air just yet. So she did the only thing she had in her, which was to reach over, slow, and take the apple clean out of the king's huge hand, and lift it, and bite it, a good loud crisp bite, right there in the gold light, looking up at him the whole while. And she did not give it back. And that was as much as Hazel Lyndon could manage to say that evening, and by the look that came over the king's scarred face, it was enough, and more than enough, and exactly the right amount. The two of them stood on in the hum and the gold, and let the unsaid thing go on ripening one more season on the branch, which suited the both of them right down to the ground, because they were each of them people who had learned the hard way that the sweetest fruit is the kind you do not pull green. Entry 53, the Black Book read that night, in a hand not quite so steady as usual. She bit the apple and kept it. I do not know how a man is meant to sleep after a thing like that. I have not been sleeping much regardless. I am keeping a fire lit and a book open over a woman's appetite for fruit, and I would have any other orc flogged for it. Worth it. Dorsey Lott came back, of course. They always do. He came back when he heard, 2 years and more too late, that his banker's daughter over in Coldwater had not, in the end, married him either. The dowry having come tied to conditions Dorsey Lott had not the character in him to meet. The way a borrowed coat never quite fits the borrower, and the grand match had fallen through and left Dorsey exactly where he'd started, only older and balder and a deal more bitter. And he had spent that sour year and the next watching his discarded bride become, of all the wormwood and gall a vain man can be made to swallow, a woman of note. The beekeeper who'd raised the Orc King's famous grove. Talked of in 3 counties. Honey sold to lords. Respected. Established. And this was the part Dorsey Lott could not get down at all. The part that lodged in him sideways and would not pass, happy. The girl he had thrown away with a borrowed pen had not had the decency to be ruined by it. She had landed, against all the rules as Dorsey understood them, a great deal softer than he had. And his vanity, which was the largest organ in his body, could not abide it. So Dorsey Lott came north to the great Ashvale harvest market, when half the border was up at the line buying the famous fruit and the famous dark honey, and he made his play in front of all of them, which was, of course, the very crown and capstone of every mistake the man had ever made. He came up to Hazel at her honey table, all oiled charm, loud enough to carry, pitched for the crowd. He had been a fool, he said, a young fool. And he'd never once stopped thinking of her, not for a day. And he'd come all this way to make it right and take her back where she belonged. A girl with a gift like hers, he said, belonged with a man of prospects and human comforts and human society. Not buried up a cold Orc valley among the gray skins doing a beekeeper's rough labor with her own 2 hands. And he held out his hand to her, there before the whole watching market, human and Orc alike, gone quiet around the two of them, as if he were a prince in a story come to lift her up out of the ashes she'd had the poor taste to thrive in. Hazel Lyndon looked at the offered hand. And then she looked at the man. And she did not take it. Dorsey, she said, and she did not raise her voice, but she pitched it clear enough that the silent market caught every word, the way she'd learned to pitch a thing to carry over a humming grove. You left me standing in a church in my wedding dress in front of the whole of Bonham, and you sent a boy with a note, because you had not the spine in your whole body to come and say it to my face. You traded me off for a dowry that in the end would not have you. And now you've heard, somehow, all the way down there in your bitterness, that I am happy, that I landed soft after you threw me down as hard as you knew how, and you find you cannot stand it. So here you are. Not because you want me. You never once wanted me, Dorsey. A man does not send a boy with a note for a woman he wants. You've come because you cannot bear that the girl you threw away got up off the ground and built a better life out of the wreck of the one you left her than you have managed to build out of the whole one you kept. She set her two strong hands flat on the boards of her honey table. You asked once, by note, by boy, to be rid of me. And I have been grateful for it every single day since. Do you hear me? Grateful. Because being jilted by you, Dorsey Lott, is the finest thing that has ever happened to me in all my life. It is how I came to be sitting on a rock at the edge of the world the evening a king rode out and took off his hat and asked me, like I was worth the asking, did I have anywhere to go, and meant it. You gave me nothing but a note and a boy and a public ruin. He gave me my bees and a door that locks from my side and my whole self back. You have no claim on me, Dorsey. You signed it all away that morning in 5 lines in a borrowed hand. There is the road south. I would take it, were I you, and take it quick, before my bees take an interest in you. They are particular about who comes round the honey, and they have a long memory for sour, and they can smell a thing gone bad from a fair way off. And the market laughed. Not at her, not at Hazel Lyndon, not this time, not for the first time in all the long history of Hazel and a watching crowd, but at him. At Dorsey Lott, human and orc together, roaring it out under the harvest banners, while the man stood there with his offered hand still hanging foolish in the air between them. Dorsey Lott, who had ridden all this way north to perform a grand, magnanimous triumph, and been handed instead his own jilting back in kind, with interest, in front of the largest crowd of his life, went first a deep red and then a sick white, and snatched back his hand and turned, and got on his horse to the sound of an entire border market laughing, and rode south, and was not much spoken of in that country ever after, except now and again of a winter as a sort of cautionary tale told to vain young men over a fire. And through the whole of it, Rogar of Ashvale had come up quiet at Hazel's shoulder somewhere in the middle, and stood there at her back, huge and silent and still, and had not said one single word, nor lifted one finger, nor fought 1 ounce of her fight for her. Because the great scarred king had learned, over 3 slow years, the one thing about this woman that mattered most of all, that she could fight her own, and that the kindest and the truest thing he could do was to stand at her back and let her. You didn't need me for that at all, he said, low, when Dorsey was gone south and the market had gone back to its buying. No, Hazel agreed. I didn't. She turned and looked up at him. But I was glad you were there. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference in the world. I spent the first 24 years of my life needing someone to stand between me and the next bad thing that was coming, needing it so badly I'd have married a coward to get it. It is a far, far finer feeling, Rogar, to fight your own bad thing with your own 2 hands, and win it, and find when you turn round that someone you'd have wanted there was there the whole time, not holding you up, just glad at your back. She looked at him a moment longer. That's not need. I'm done with need. That's the other thing. The good one. The one I didn't have a word for till just now. He asked her that same evening, properly this time, under the apple trees, with the harvest crowd gone home, and the bees gone in, and the gold come down to amber over the valley. I asked you a question once, he said, on a road, at the edge of the world. I asked, did you have anywhere to go, and you said no, and I told you now you do. And I meant a room, and a wage, and your bees and a bolt on your side of the door. Because that was the whole of what I had any right in this world to offer a woman I had, just that hour watched, get her heart broken in public by a coward with a borrowed pen. I have wanted to offer the rest of it for the better part of 3 years, Hazel, and I never once dared, for fear you would think it had been the bargain all along, that the bees were the bait and this the hook, which it never was. I swear it on my father's grove. Never for 1 hour. But you turned your back on the open road home in front of armed men of your own kind, and you faced down Dorsey Lott today without one finger's help from me, and chose this place and these trees and these gray-green people again, with your eyes wide open and no soul on this earth left for you to fall back on. So now, only now, I think I have the right to ask you. And you have the standing to answer me free. He took her hands in his great ones, sticky with honey as they both were from the day's work, and he went down, this 7-foot scarred king of the orcs went slowly down onto one knee in the grass of his father's grove, so that even kneeling his eyes were near level with hers. I do not want a beekeeper for my grove, Hazel Lyndon. I have one, and she is the best in 3 counties, and I would not insult her by pretending that is what I'm asking. I want you. For my life. Not because you've nowhere else to go. You could keep bees anywhere from here to the southern sea, and lords would line their roads to have you, and we both know it. Marry me because there is an orchard here that has been yours since the first hive went under it, and a people who are yours, and a great clumsy king who has been yours, if I am honest, since about the moment he found you on that rock and couldn't ride away. I would like that now you do I gave you on the road to be a permanent thing. Hazel, I would like it to mean a home, and not just a hive. I would like it to mean here, with me, always, and not just here, for the season, for the wage. The great scarred face did something that, on a smaller and less terrifying creature, would have been a shy and hopeful smile. You bit my apple under these trees a year ago, he said, and you did not give it back, and I have been lying awake by that fire every season since, hoping against hope that it meant what I let myself believe it meant. So I am asking you plain, the way your father liked a thing said plain. Hazel Lyndon, will you marry me? And Hazel Lyndon, who had stood at a human altar once in a made-over dress and been handed 5 lines in a borrowed hand by a barefoot boy, looked down at the plain, honest, kneeling king of the orcs, asking her plainly under the very trees her own bees had raised from the dead, and found that the answer was the single easiest thing she had ever in her life had to say. I stood up to be married once, she said, and her voice was not flat now. Not flat at all. And a coward sent a boy, and then a decent orc rode out to a rock at the edge of the world and took off his hat and asked did I have anywhere to go, and meant it, and gave me my bees, and a door that locked from my side, and 3 whole years to remember I was worth more than 1 borrowed pen, and never, not once, pressed me for a single thing. You want to know what the bitten apple meant, Rogar of Ashvale? She put her sticky hands around his great sticky ones. It meant yes. It has meant yes since the harvest. It has been sitting in me meaning yes for a full year while we both stood here being careful. Ask me proper there. You've asked me proper. Now hear it proper. Yes. The answer is yes. It was always going to be yes. He asked her proper. She said yes, out loud, under the loaded trees, with the last bees going home gold around the 2 of them. And the great scarred king of the orcs put his face down against her honey-sticky hands, and was quiet a long while. And Hazel Lyndon stood in the amber light of her own grove, and understood that she was, at the very long last, exactly where she had been walking toward the whole time. Only the road had been so plain, and so unlike the loud, bright thing she'd thought she wanted, that she had near walked past it sitting on a rock. They married that autumn, under the propped and groaning trees, with the whole valley up, and the bees going home gold around them. And the king cried, which he denied to his grave. And Hazel Heart, for she took the old human form of his name, Heart, and he let her, finding he liked the sound of Hazel Heart, and the joke buried in it both. Hazel Heart kept the bees and the grove, and made them famous in not 3 counties, but 5 for the rest of her long life. The dark garnet orchard honey, the heavy propped red fruit, the green valley that had come back from the dead and never went barren again. And she did one thing more, the thing she is best remembered for up the border to this very day. She took in girls. Every motherless, castaway, thrown away, jilted, ruined, run out of places to go girl that the hard border country could throw at her. Human and orc and goblin and half of each. Every one of them that turned up at the line with a gift in her hands and no ground in all the world to use it on. Hazel Heart took them north into her green valley and put hives into their hands and taught them, frame by frame and season by season, the gentle humming craft of the bees, because she had not forgotten. She never once forgot, not in 50 years, what it was to be a person with a true gift and no place on this earth that wanted it. To be an orchard going barren year over year for the simple want of bees. And she made of her valley the one place on the whole border where a thrown-away girl with a gift could always find a door that locked from her own side, and honest work that was her own, and somebody who needed exactly the thing only she could do. She and Rogar raised a houseful of children of their own under those apple trees, gray-green and brown and every shade between, loud and many and unafraid of the bees, the way only the small and the wise ever are. And Hazel told them, when they were old enough to understand the weight of it, the whole true story. The wedding she didn't have, the note and the boy, and the long staring walk out of town, the rock at the edge of the world where the road ran out, and the great scarred king who rode up out of the dark and took off his hat and asked the one right question. She did not tell it to them as a sad story ever, though it had sadness in it. She told it as the single truest piece of luck in her whole long life. For, she would say, the very worst day I ever stood through turned out to be the road to the very best. And a girl jilted by a fool is only a girl set free to be found by a good king. If she can just sit still on the rock long enough to be found. And the black book, the war ledger, the great grim book of grudges that an orc king once turned on the worst and best night of his life into something else entirely. The black book filled, year over year, all the long decades of their marriage, with entries that had not one drop of blood or revenge or debt in any of them. The day the first child came. The year the grove bore the heaviest crop in living memory, and they had to give apples away by the cartload. The morning he woke and could not for a moment remember the loneliness, and had to go and find the old early pages to be sure it had ever been real. Every honeycrock on a windowsill, every best apple set by, the last keeper of a dead father's grudges, filling a war book full of joy, one plain entry at a time, until the very end of his days. Last entry, the final page read, in a hand gone old and shaky, but plain as ever. For I am near the end of the book, and near the end of the man, and there is a kind of rightness to running out of both at once. I have kept this book my whole life. My father meant it for our wrongs, and I have not written one wrong in it in 50 years. Because the day she came north, I found I had nothing left over to spend on grudges, and I have never once gone back for them. I found her on a rock with nowhere to go. I told her, "Now you do." I have spent 50 years finding out that I was the one who'd had nowhere to go, all along, and never known it, and that she was the somewhere. Bury this book in the grove. Let it feed the trees. It is the only war I ever won that was worth the winning. If you're still here with me, all the way to the end of it, then you're part of this story now. And I mean that. So go on and hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell us down in the comments which entry in that old black book hit you the hardest. Because I have a feeling I know, and I want to see if I'm right. There are more of these waiting for you, every one, over on Orc Girl and Human. And that was the story of Hazel Lyndon. The bride left standing at the altar in a borrowed dress, handed 5 lines by a barefoot boy in front of her whole town, with not one place left on this earth to go. Who walked out with her chin up and ran clean out of road, and sat down on a gray stone at the edge of the world to wait for she knew not what. Who was found there, at dusk, by a great scarred king of the orcs who took off his hat and asked her one plain question. "Do you have anywhere to go?" And heard her answer no. And answered her back, in a voice like river stones turning, "Now you do." And found, at the long, long end of it, her bees and her worth, and a green valley brought back from the dead, and a whole people's tomorrow, and a house full of children, and a war book full of joy, and a king who'd had nowhere to go his whole life and never known it till she walked north and became the somewhere. A home. A real one. The kind a coward with a borrowed pen could never once have given her, and the kind she was never, not for a single day of the rest of her life, jilted from again. If this one warmed you tonight, let me know down in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I hope it found you well. And I'll see you, my friend, in the next one.